So you're in your 50s, 60s, or even older, and you're recently divorced. How do financial preferences shape your romantic partnering process? My guest today is dedicated to help answer this question. Lauren Harris, PhD, is an assistant professor of human development and family studies at the University of New Hampshire. Her research focuses on romantic relationship development. She's been studying later life repartnering for more than 5 years. Dr. Harris's work has been published in many academic journals, and she's been featured in local and national news reports and podcasts. In fact, that's where I met Lauren. We were guests on a PBS podcast discussing late life divorce. I'm so glad she's here with us today. Lauren, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to dive into this topic with you.
Awesome. Well, before we get into the nitty gritty, I'm curious how you came to study how financial preferences impact the kind of relationship older adults seek. Obviously, you're not in this demographic. You're quite young. How is it
Very
that
kind of you.
this research came to interest you?
Sure. So I kind of say it chose me. I did not choose it. In graduate school, I was interested in studying family formation and how gender and work life and family life intersected and how that impacted families. And I was in my dissertation status and I was trying to find a research topic and it just wasn't working. And I will spare you the very long details, but after some conversations with my advisor, he said, maybe older adults is really where you should look into. And I dove into it. I read all the literature on older adult repartnering, which was not much at the time.
Mhm.
And it just seemed really interesting, and people were not studying it. And so it kind of sparked an interest for me. It was an open field. And I thought this will, I'll dive in. I'll be able to do some really good work here because a lot hadn't been done. When we think of repartnering, we often think of people in their 30s or 40s,
Right.
and we weren't thinking about people in their 60s and 70s, which is really unfortunate because it's a very large population. And so I was really curious to dive into the field that didn't have enough research in it.
Well, personally, I'm very glad you have because your research is very interesting to me, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate your thoughts as well. In my work as a financial advisor, I work with a lot of people in retirement, and certainly in my work specializing in gray divorce and helping people before, during, and after mid to late life divorce. I'm privy to their lives. In many cases, my clients, both on the financial advisory and the divorce side, become friends and they open up to me. And often, and in some cases, it may be through widowhood or just that they've always been single, but in many cases, it's as a result of divorce. But they share with me their concerns as they embark on romantic relationships. And quite often, these concerns revolve around money
Of course, yeah.
and attitudes to money of their
Mhm.
partners and legacy issues. And
Mhm.
you've touched on all these things. And
Yes,
so
yeah, those are sort of the big three.
yeah, so I'm curious, perhaps you could give an overview of what you found with respect to how men and women, because gender is obviously a focus as well, gender opinions, how they approach finances and dating differently than each other in later life.
Sure. So I'll start by saying for this research, I do have a specific data set. So I interviewed older adults in their 60s and 70s, men and women, 50 men and 50 women who were single and interested in repartnering. So a lot of what I'm looking at is for people who do want to repartner and who do want to date and find a companion or remarry or whatever that might be for them, how are they approaching it? So somebody who does not want to date, does not want to repartner, might look at things a little bit differently.
Right.
And so for the people that I spoke to, the big concern, sort of the umbrella here, was the independence and
Mhm.
keeping things separate. A lot of people discussed different ways that they were concerned or cautious about merging finances or becoming in any way financially dependent or linked with another person at this stage of their life. And so the big takeaway really was what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine, and we're going to keep things separate. That we can still have love and companionship and date and have a good time, but we're going to keep the accounts to ourselves.
Now, that would seem to me to be quite distinct from younger person's attitudes towards
Mm-hmm.
finance. Is that so?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, in some ways, older adults and younger adults are concerned about financial issues, but they approach them very differently. So, younger adults, as we know through other studies, tend to look at a partner to build a life with for years and years and years to come. So, their financial concerns are much more about, can this partner be a financial contributor to our family? Can this person earn a decent income, support the family? Even in two income households, they might say, if I lose my job, can I depend on this person? Do we approach money in the same way? Can I trust them to spend our shared finances wisely? When we think about older adults, it's concern, but in the opposite direction. It's much more about, can we keep things separate? I don't want to depend on them, and I don't want them to depend on me. I want them to make good financial decisions, but really that's their business, and they get to decide what to do with their money. So both younger and older adults are concerned about financial issues and partnership, but younger adults are really interested in merging, where older adults are interested in keeping things very separate.
Now, this is fascinating to me because this certainly confirms what I've seen when my clients, discuss because I'm their financial advisor, and say
Mhm.
they come to me with financial concerns, and often often it's a female client and say, "Well, Andrew, I've been dating a guy, and
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I'm really impressed at the extent to which they recognize the importance
Mhm.
of their independence.
Mhm.
And perhaps we could talk a little bit about why this difference
Mhm.
comes into play between the younger and older. And I think part of it is that maybe there's a little bit more wisdom here, and we've learned from some hard-earned experiences
Mhm.
with our previous partners.
Mhm.
And maybe it's an age issue as well. It's like we don't have
Yes.
as long
Yes.
to live, and we need to protect what we've built. What are your thoughts as to why this might be the case?
Sure. So younger adults are going in with more ideas of possibility and opportunity. For younger adults, and when I mean younger adults, 20s and 30s, they are also just starting out and building their financial life. And so when two people come together at the beginning of careers, in the beginning of life, they're partnering up with the idea that they're going to build something together, that it's opportunity, it's possibility. I think of my brother who recently got married, and he was kind of saying, well, I didn't have much, she didn't have much. We don't need a prenup. We're going in this on equal footing. And when we think of older adults, it's much more about, I've spent the last 40, 50 years working. My husband, my wife, and I were building this business, these assets. We put in a lot of work and effort. That is something I've done so much on my own or so much in this partnership before me that I don't necessarily want to share or give that to somebody else. It's so much less about building something together and protecting the assets you have. And to your point, older adults have maybe decades left, but they're kind of looking at the second chapter or the third chapter of their
Right.
lives and thinking, I don't know if I'll have health issues, or I don't know what's around the corner. I want to protect my assets for what's next. I'm not ready to take on another person, to care for another person. I'm sure you've heard the phrase I hear a lot from women who say, I don't want to be a nurse or a purse. I don't want to take care of another person financially, in the way that my husband and I did and cared for each other in all of those years.
Oh, I've heard that, and I also hear I don't want to be a bag lady.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
the question I often hear, perhaps during the divorce or early in the financial planning stages, is, am I going to be okay? So,
Yes, of course.
there's a lot of focus on maintaining what's been
Mhm.
built over
Mhm.
time, but that doesn't necessarily preclude. I mean, obviously, there can be a relationship. It could be a dating relationship, or it could be a marital relationship, and there can still be independence.
Yes,
And
of
you
course.
raised the issue. You mentioned the word prenups, which I
Hmm.
think is very important.
Yes.
And certainly, I went through my great divorce, and I never said I'm never getting married again. I hear that from clients occasionally. And I think in the back of my mind, okay, never say never.
Hmm.
I said I'd never say I wouldn't get married again, but I did say I would never get married again without a prenup.
Sure. Yeah.
And certainly I got a prenup. And so that can lend a certain amount of confidence or security. Now, I don't know if your research encompassed discussion of prenups at all, but I'm curious if it came up at all.
Sure. So I will say, of the 100 respondents I spoke with, a prenup came up, I would say about three times, about three respondents mentioned it. And interestingly, it was mentioned very offhandedly. And so I will kind of reiterate that all of my respondents were looking for a partner. They did not currently have one. And so there may be something different when you're speaking about somebody you already know, a partner you already had for a year or two or whatever it might be. So people were speaking in hypotheticals. And so prenups came up very rarely. And when they did, they were offhanded. Somebody would say, yeah, I guess if I were going to get remarried, I guess I could get a prenup or something. And so I think for a lot of people, the issue is not having a concrete person in mind where we're thinking, if I were to get into a relationship or if I were to get married again, that's not now. There's not somebody that I'm in love with today that we're planning a wedding and thinking about a prenuptial agreement. And I think the other part of it is just the stigma around a prenup.
Hmm.
It is a very smart move. I'm on the same page. I think a prenup is a great part of the process. But think for a lot of people, especially older adults, they're coming through a time and a culture where a prenuptial agreement was often seen as believing you're already going to get divorced before you get married. We do see the trend. Younger people today are more open to prenuptial agreements. Older adults are a little bit still in this idea that why would you get married if you're just going to get a prenup and get divorced? So
I
there is a bit of
wonder,
a stigma around there.
I wonder, Lauren, if that stigma might be a little less, and if your respondents who have already gone through a gray divorce
Hmm.
might be more amenable and have less stigma. And I'm curious, this kind of ties in with my question about how divorce as opposed to
Hmm.
widowhood might affect older adults' approaches to finances and dating. And I would think that older adults who've already gone through an expensive, long divorce, no stigma. I'm getting the
Hmm.
prenup because I never want to go through this again. I'm curious
Yes,
your
yes.
thoughts there.
Sure. I will say across the board, for most people, mostly had an attitude of, I'm not interested in getting married again. A lot of people would say, right after that, maybe I will, if the right person came along or if I met somebody that was really important to them, I would consider it. But for most people, men and women, marriage wasn't at the top of their list. There were certainly men and women who said, yes, I would like to be remarried. I would like that opportunity again. But for most people, they said, I don't need that. If that happens, that's fine. I'm not going into dating needing to be married or with that goal. And so I think that was sort of a part of it, not needing a prenuptial agreement or not considering it because you're really not considering being married. One thing that came up is that widows, particularly, were a little bit more protective of their assets than even widowers or people, men or women who have been divorced. But you're right, divorce is a big financial experience.
Yeah.
We know, especially for women, it can lead to a drop in the quality of life, the resources that you have. Men tend to have a little bit more money, a higher income, things like that. Although that gap is narrowing, we do see women sort of more similar to men financially after a divorce. So it's funny that you bring that up. I've been trying to peel this apart, and I'm wondering if part of it is that people who have gone through divorce and who have had that financial experience might just not have so much now, that they might not be as protective because they don't have the financial resources that say a widow or a widower might have, who has 100% of what the couple had, right? They lost their partner, so they have everything. Somebody who's divorced has half of what they had. Not to say that that's exactly what's going on, but to your point, it is kind of curious how people who have experienced divorce versus widowhood might approach this a little bit differently. So I will say again, widows specifically were a little bit more protective of their assets, even than widowers were. But we also see women in general are a little bit more protective.
Yeah, there's so many different variables at play there. I know
Mhm.
psychologically for a boomer woman who's lost her husband, it could be that he was the prime bread earner, and
Mhm.
there's an element of respecting his memory and wanting to preserve, what he's left. I would say that for my divorcing clients, and many of them still have plenty of assets, after the divorce, and certainly enough to live on. But I think I do see in my I don't this isn't academic research, this is all
Sure.
anecdotal, but I do see a desire to protect,
Oh, sure.
and that's probably because the net worth in the family's been split in half.
Hmm.
So um,
Sure.
there's
Oh,
not
yeah.
as much.
I don't mean to allude that those who have divorced are not protective by any stretch.
Sure,
Across
sure.
the board, people were protective.
Yeah, no, but it's curious. There are nuances,
Oh, for
and
sure.
it's interesting as I was reading because I'm a student of history, and I recognize, as I think all of us, that in the grand scheme of history,
Mm.
marriage was really an economic
Oh,
pact,
yes.
and
Hmm.
financial issues have always been paramount in
Hmm.
marriage. It's only recently, in
Hmm.
the terms of historical development, I mean, the
Yes.
last 100 or 200 years,
Yes.
whatever it is, that
Yes.
romantic
Hmm.
issues have surged to the forefront. So
Hmm.
I found it interesting that how in later life,
Hmm.
um, romance is, yes, it's important, but there's much more awareness of the financial issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, marriage until sort of the mid 18th century, 17th century were actually called economic. Like we labeled them as economic unions because the finances were really the important. You were merging families. You were, especially for women, it's an economic status. Are you going to have a partner who can provide a roof over your head and food on the table because you are not able to work outside the home for pay? And if you do, that money belongs to your husband. And so marriage, especially for women, was absolutely an economic union. And then, as you mentioned, over the last 100 years, we've really shifted to be more of what we call now an individualistic marriage, where we women people all people can work outside the home for pay. Women can have credit cards and have bank accounts on their own since the mid 70s, and so women are much more on equal financial footing, more so than they've ever been before. And so we kind of see marriage in some ways, as we're seeing with older adults, marriage is an option. It's not a requirement. Older adults today don't feel like they need to be married, young adults as well, but don't feel like they need to be married to have companionship, to have a partner, to live with someone, to be happy, that they can have separate finances, be independent, take care of themselves, and also being in a loving, supportive relationship. That finances come into play, but in a very different way than they have historically.
What I found interesting, another thing, because there's a lot of
Mhm.
interesting stuff in your research,
Thank
is
you.
that you do note that remarriage does tend to increase financial stability
Hmm.
and living standards in
Hmm.
later life, as which we would intuit, because certainly divorce cuts the marital assets in the net worth in half. But one thing that I've certainly found in my remarriage, later life remarriage, and you can see in other successful repartnerings, is that one plus one can equal more than two, and and that a repartnering done well, where independence can be maintained, but that each partner brings something to both financial and emotional to the equation, can be very, very successful financially.
Hmm. For sure. Especially in for this population, this demographic, especially for women, women who are able to partner with somebody who makes more money, who has more social security, whatever the assets are.
Right.
Men tend to have more money in all of those arenas. And so it's especially stabilizing. We think of it as a stabilizing relationship, especially for women who might have had no income. They might not have worked outside the home for pay. And so repartnering in later life can be very stabilizing for them. Men, not quite as much, but also in the same way, tend to get a little bit more of the health and social benefits out of marriage. Women tend to get a little bit more of the financial benefits out of
That's
marriage.
so important what you're saying. And I
Mhm.
think that's corroborated by other research that I've
Mhm.
read
Sure.
on the economic side for repartnering for women.
Mhm.
But certainly on the emotional and social side for
Mhm.
men. And it's not all or one
No,
on either
no.
side, because I know personally, financially, I've done very well simply because having a partner and a stable home life,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
without the distractions of
Mhm.
dating,
Mhm.
and just having somebody who supports you and is there for you
Mhm.
emotionally, and that ultimately translates to the way you approach your work.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
there are a lot.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have this idea, especially among boomers and older generations, that men worked outside the home for pay and women stayed home and didn't earn an income. And what you really need to realize is that men were able to work outside the home for pay because they had a wife at home taking care of everything. Kind of to
Yes.
your point, somebody is able to work outside the home and do well at their job and be committed and, be a good employee because they know when they come home, someone else has done the grocery shopping, someone else has cooked the dinner, someone else has done the laundry, someone else has cleaned the house. And so it really is a partnership there. And so men and women in that partnership do benefit a lot financially, socially, emotionally, because of those things are inextricably tied together.
Yeah. I found, in my case and some other cases that I've seen, is the stable home life. You become more focused on each other and
Mhm.
supporting each other, both personally and professionally,
Mhm.
and you can see tremendous growth in that area. So,
Oh, absolutely.
um, you mentioned it's interesting because you talked about health issues.
Mhm.
Economic issues on one side, social and health issues.
Mhm.
The extremes of that, I suppose, and you mentioned the nurse in the purse
Yes.
a moment ago. To what extent do you see perhaps the old sugar daddy or sugar mama
Mhm.
effect?
Mhm.
And to what extent do you see, I need a nurse?
Mhm.
So those are kind of the extremes, but do you still
Mhm.
see those things in play?
For my respondents, they were adamant that they would be neither the sugar daddy nor the sugar baby nor the sugar mama. They were not interested in any of this. A few of them mentioned those terms specifically and said, I will not engage in that kind of relationship. I will say I recruited my respondents from online dating sites, and so
Hmm.
in that world, we do see a little bit more of scamming or those relationships,
Right.
more financial relationships there. And so some people would say, I have come across people who are looking for that, and I'm not interested. And so really, everything that I was finding, everything that my respondents said was aligned with this idea of I'm not supporting you and I don't want you to support me. We are completely separate. I am sure those relationships and the desire for those relationships exist in this population among older adults, but I think it's a very, very small portion, and certainly not in the research that I was finding. So I think it might also be a financial status issue. My respondents generally felt that they were moderately to pretty financially comfortable, and so we might see that those desire for those relationships amongst people who feel that they are not so financially secure.
Right.
So that might be a piece there. I will say not in this paper that we're talking about. In another paper, I focused on the impact of care work in dating for older adults and the how providing care or needing care is going to alter your opportunities on the dating market. And so that care work came up a lot.
Mm.
Women especially were saying, I am interested in dating a healthy man. I do not want to be a nurse. I do not want to
Mhm.
do the care work. They would follow it up and say, if later down the road, my partner needs something, of course I'm going to be there, but I don't want to start a relationship with the expectation that I'm providing care. I will say, as a side note, men were quite disinterested in dating a woman who was providing care to grandchildren, to aging parents, to adult children. Men were much more focused on wanting a partner who was able to drop everything and go to lunch on a Tuesday or do a long
Right.
weekend vacation or thing. So care work does come up a lot, and the idea of nobody wants to provide it and nobody wants anybody else to be so ingrained in care work that they're not paying attention to their relationship.
I want to ask a little bit from the male perspective about the social aspect again,
Mhm.
because
Sure.
quite often one of the great societal problems with older men is loneliness because men
Mhm.
tend to find it more difficult to make friends.
Yes.
Um, and quite often the wife is the social networker. She's the one who's
Mhm.
responsible for getting together with the family or getting
Yeah.
together with the friends. I'm wondering to what extent maybe you've seen older men showing an interest in repartnering to have the social connection not only with the romantic partner but to be brought back into the world, so to speak.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, so we call women kin keepers, that they are the ones, as you mentioned, they are the ones who tell you, hey, it's your mother's birthday, don't forget to call, or you haven't
Yes.
seen your friends, you should go out, or I've invited your family over for Mother's Day, whatever it is, right? Women are doing that work. And so that's one of the reasons at divorce, men tend to see a big dip in their social lives because they are not the ones who are maintaining those relationships and they have not built the skills or maintained the muscle on maintaining relationships. And so women tend to take their friends with them because they're putting in all of the work. And so that in this research is coming out in the sense that we have known historically for decades that men are more interested in getting remarried than women are. So men
Yes.
after divorce or even widowhood, we do see that widowers rather, tend to repartner relatively quickly after the loss of a wife. And part of that is the connection. Historically, we know that if you ask somebody who their best friend is, men and women will name a woman. A woman will say, "Oh, my best friend is a woman," and men will say, "Oh, my wife is my best friend." And
Right.
so much of their social life, both from their partner and because of their partner. And so we do know that historically men are more interested in repartnering and remarrying than women are. I will say women are kind of catching up a little bit to that. Not so much in the remarriage aspect. Women still are not so interested in the remarriage, but they are interested in repartnering. And so for men, they look at their partner as the source of their emotional support, of their social lives. Not explicitly, men are not saying, I want to get remarried because I miss my friends. That's not coming up. But there's something they know. They miss that companionship, that partnership, that they come home every day and someone's going to care about their day and talk to them. Where women are going to call their sister, they're going to call their friends, they're going to get together. And so, men, we do know that there's more desire in partnership because of that social aspect.
Something just occurred to me. Before I remarried in 2021, I was in a 3-year relationship
Mhm.
with a woman, dating relationship, and we broke up. And I remember my 85-year-old mother was very annoyed with me, and who's a widow. Widow. My 85-year-old mother's a widow,
Mhm.
and she was very annoyed with me. She said, "Well, what are you going to do? You're going to be old and alone."
Mhm.
And I thought, well, you're 85 and single, and you don't seem to be having any problems. And of course, she has tons of friends, and she goes
Mhm.
to exercise class and has coffee and lunch with all the girls. But
Mhm.
obviously, she thought that I was going to be some, very lonely old man. And
Mhm.
of course, and then following on that, I did get remarried. And you're
Mhm.
right. My current wife is so good at making sure you need to get your mother a present for Mother's Day and
Mhm.
birthday's
Mhm.
coming up, and she takes care of a lot of the social
Mhm.
issues. So
Mhm.
that's certainly playing out in my life.
Yeah.
Lauren, we're running low on time, and I wanted to discuss one other subject that I find fascinating.
Mhm.
In my podcast, the most listened to episode of the 90 something episodes I've done centers around older children, adult children of gray divorcees, which is a really a sadly neglected group
Mhm.
in the divorce world. Attorneys will always ask, "Do you have any minor children?" And if the
Mhm.
answer is no, we don't, they'll move on to the next subject. But I'm curious because I've seen this
Mhm.
with some of my older clients, and in as they embark on romantic relationships or even remarriage, the
Mhm.
importance of their adult children in repartnering decisions. Perhaps you could touch a little bit on this.
Absolutely. Adult children play a monumental role in how older adults think about finances in their repartnering. Absolutely. It was one of the things that sparked the interest, kind of going back to your very first question, sparked the interest in this topic for me. I generally have curiosity in personal finance and things like that. And so many of my respondents brought up financial issues around adult children. And this is going in two very different ways. A number would say, my adult children are so supportive. They say, go out, have a good time, date. I want you to be happy. You deserve it, things like this. Don't worry about it. And so adult children can be very supportive in an older adult or in their parents dating, repartnering, how they frame that. Some older adults said, my daughter signed me up for the online dating site and took pictures for me. And so those are really heartwarming stories of adult children who just want their parents to be happy.
Those are the heartwarming stories.
They really are. And then there was sort of the other side of it, where adult children sometimes are not so supportive. And I will say, older adults thought of protecting their assets for themselves in their older age, but they really were talking about protecting their assets for their children. They really wanted their inheritance to go to their children. So many people said, my husband and I built this business together, or my wife and I really saved to take care of our kids, and that's what would make her happy. And so I want to make sure that my money goes to the children. And so this came up time and time and time again. People talked about prenups the few times that came up, or I don't want to get married again because I don't want my husband of 6 months to get everything and then he dies and everything goes to his children and my children
Mm.
get nothing. There was
Yeah,
concern there.
yeah.
And so a lot of older adults did not want to get remarried because of the legal implications of where their resources would go. And so in some ways, older adults would say, I want to protect my children. They deserve it. Is their money, is their father's money, it's their mother's money. There was also a subset who felt constrained in repartnering because their adult children were negative about it and in regards to the finances. I had a
Hmm.
few people say, my children have told me, don't date or don't get remarried. I want the money. There was one case in specific
Wow.
I think of all the time. His name is Calvin. He was in his late 60s. He was dating. He really wanted to repartner. He was very lonely. He was going on dates, and he had two adult sons who would mock him, make fun of him, yell at him, and literally say, "You're spending our money. That's our money. Stop taking
Ooh.
these women out to dinner." And he was very upset about it, very devastated. He felt like his children only cared about the money and they didn't care about him or his happiness. And so that thankfully that didn't come up too often, but there were some respondents who felt that their adult children were constraining their decisions, that their adult children wanted the resources and the inheritance, and so that they were not able to, they weren't allowed by their adult children to repartner, to date, or even remarry. And so I will say, most cases it was the adults looking out for their children, but in some cases it was the children demanding the inheritance. And so I hope your listeners don't have that experience too much. That part was heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, that is sad. And sometimes, of course, the adult children um just can't picture their mother,
Hmm.
and typically the
Hmm.
mother is the surviving, the
Hmm.
mother with, another man, or
Hmm.
bringing this other person into their lives, and might somehow, you know, uh, damage their memory of their father. So there may be emotional
For sure.
issues
Oh, for
certainly as
sure.
well.
Yeah. Adult children can really sabotage that. And so maybe the resources or the conversation about inheritance is because they don't feel comfortable with their parent repartnering for sure. There's such a spectrum of the role that
Yes.
adult children can play in this process, from incredibly supportive to kind of sabotaging and detrimental.
And of course, the issue of protecting their
Mhm.
their older parent from, you know, perhaps a nefarious character who maybe.
Yes. Yes, yeah. A few respondents would say, my adult children warn me all the time. This is what a scam looks like. That sounds like a scammer. Are you safe? Are you meeting in a public place? I
Mm,
think adult children oftentimes have used online dating or have dated, and they might not believe that their 60-year-old, 70-year-old parent is aware of some of the dangers that are a little different today than they were, when a boomer was dating in their 20s and 30s. And so
yeah.
I think older adult children can be a little protective of their parents, rightfully so. Honestly, I've talked to some people who have told me about relationships they are in that I am skeptical of that sound a little scammy. And so I will say also, just it is important to be aware of some of the trends and be safe and kind of be smart about it.
There's so much to talk about. There's such a
For
rich
sure.
field for study, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing to bring more light on the issue of finances and older life repartnering. Lauren, I'm curious, as a last word here, is there anything maybe we haven't covered that you want to touch on, or anything particularly surprising in your research that you wanted to mention?
I think we've done a really good job. I will say, kind of as maybe words of wisdom, but I would say don't let any of this prevent you from finding love or partnership or whatever it is that you want. I will say across the board, respondents were on the same page about what they were looking for, and how finances would play into this. And so I think a lot of people were nervous that they would want to keep things separate and they would find somebody who didn't. And I will say men and women were both on the same page that they wanted to keep things separately. So I would say don't not date because you're concerned about the financial aspect. It seems like older adults are generally on board with keeping things separate. And it's really about knowing what you want and knowing what works for you, and then keep looking for that. So I'm very in favor of older adults finding love, romance. These things are important at all stages of our lives. So don't let the financial aspects stand in your way.
No, I love that, and I love how your research challenges the notion that older adults are uninterested in romantic relationships. Not the case at all, and
No, not at all.
and we're living longer, and we want to live happier lives, and that involves relationships with other people. And there are all sorts of practical ways we can keep it separated on the financial side. If our listeners are interested in finding more about your research or reading more of what you've written, how can they find your work?
Sure. So they can email me. My email address is lauren.harris@unh.edu. I have a website, lauren-e-harris.com. I'm also on the UNH website, so you can find me under the Human Development and Family Studies faculty. So I would love,
Awesome.
if anybody's interested, I would love to chat about it, hear about some experiences.
Terrific, terrific. Well, I'll make sure to put that contact information in the show notes for the podcast on transcendretirement.net. And
Thank you.
thank you so much, Lauren. I appreciate your coming in today.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.